Okay, so there's a new interview with the editors of the Boruto story, and within it they revealed something shocking regarding Masashi Kishimoto, the creator of Naruto's involvement in Boruto, or lack thereof for that matter, because, well, we've known for quite some time now, in recent times at the very least, we've gotten interviews where it was revealed exactly what Masashi Kishimoto's role has been in the Boruto story, because there's been a lot of confusion, a lot of things that oftentimes, especially when you get information like what we're going to get into here in a bit, it makes you feel a certain way as far as like what we were led to believe would be Masashi Kishimoto's role in things, and ultimately what it actually is and what he actually contributes to this whole scenario regarding the creation of the Boruto story. Because I want to say it was when the manga switched hands from the original writer of the Boruto story, Ukyo Kodachi, there was a big press release, quite a few press releases, that was basically saying that Masashi Kishimoto was taking the reins of the story. I believe even Ukyo Kodachi was quoted somewhere, I could be off on that, where he said, "I'm thankful for my time doing this thing, but I'm passing the baton back to Masashi Kishimoto." Most of us were led to believe again, okay, so Masashi Kishimoto's writing Boruto. That's crazy, that's awesome, that's good news. Then as time went on, a lot of people were questioning the validity of this thing because the writing just didn't necessarily completely resemble something that Masashi Kishimoto would do. In recent times, we got some interviews though that basically gave an insight into exactly what we thought exactly what Kishimoto's role is, that essentially, yes, he is indeed just supervising, that this is Ikemoto's manga, this is Ikemoto's story, and he basically just gives insight with each chapter on like, okay, here's his thoughts, here's what you guys should do. But it just came across for most of us, and you would assume at the very least for most of us, that with one of the most popular franchises of all time, Naruto, Boruto being a part of that thing, that his role would be more significant. At the very least, you know, again, we understood that Kishimoto isn't writing it, he's supervising and he's giving passes on chapters and, you know, stuff like that. But with this interview, it made it seem even more so like, damn, Kishimoto really ain't involved in this almost at all at this point. And yeah, and that's not to take away from things, but we'll get into it in a bit. Let's get into this whole interview. And before we continue, hit that subscribe button and that bell so you can get notified on anything and everything in the world of anime and manga. Hit them buttons. First question, how did the series start out? They said, we started having preliminary discussions around 2013 or 2014. We had roughly been talking about it over a year before the end of Naruto, which was at the end of 2014, autumn time. The Boruto movie was already set to be made, and Kishimoto had also set the groundwork by writing the story so that the future developments could be made even beyond that. That's essentially how it was born. So if they said 2013 to 2014, it ended at the end of 2014, and they said it was over a year before that, so it was definitely in 2013, probably maybe like summer, autumn time, around that ballpark of 2013, which if I'm not mistaken, that was around maybe like the Obito stuff, if I'm not mistaken. I think where Obito had became like, for a time period, he had the 10 tails and all that stuff. I want to say it was in that scenario. I want to say maybe summer 2014 is where Hashirama and Madara stuff happened. So I want to say it was, yeah, the previous year. It was around that area, which is kind of crazy to think about now, that basically during that time period, Kishimoto was actually writing, you know, pretty much the climax of one of the most important characters and one of the most important story arcs of this whole scenario with the fourth grade shinobi war, and at the same time basically coming up with the draft and the beginnings of the Boruto story. On top of the fact that it's very interesting to know, right, because if Kishimoto was working on the Boruto story, you know, the movie stuff, and at the same time developing concepts, possibly because I think the Kaguya stuff probably came around that point too, the foreshadowing of the rabbit goddess, and then it was like a year later where she popped out of Madara and all that stuff. Kishimoto had a lot on his plate and a lot of pressure in those times, because he was basically coming up with the concepts for a movie, writing out a movie, coming up with the concepts for a series that wouldn't even debut for another 3 years, which kind of also adds to the fact that, so Boruto wasn't just some half-baked, you know, toss it out there and let's get some money type of deal like a lot of us were led to believe. Sure, the anime clouded a lot of people's judgment and perception based on all the filler and all of that stuff, but ultimately the Boruto story was actually developed at least 3 years, possibly more, before it actually debuted, because it wasn't until 2016 that the Boruto manga technically began, and Kishimoto had all of this stuff worked out even before then. On top of that, trying to make sure that he had Naruto end the way he wanted it to, and making sure he set things up within the story of Naruto so that it could develop later on in Boruto, because again, if that was around the time he started putting in mentions of Kaguya, the rabbit goddess, so to speak, speak, and it wouldn't be for another year after that she appeared or whatnot. Yeah, that's a lot, and ultimately Kishimoto, you gotta tip your hat off to him. You got to give him his props because wow. Next question. How was it decided who would take on the artwork for the series? Kishimoto really loved Ikemoto's artwork. Kishimoto mentioned that he wanted to see Boruto drawn by Ikemoto, and we spoke with Ikemoto about it, and he kindly agreed, which is how the project officially began moving forward. This is a very pivotal and important one because a lot of people early on gave flack to Ikemoto because early on, the art style for the Boruto story was not necessarily what people had hoped for. Because remember, a lot of people, it's going to be jarring when you go from you're used to 700 chapters of a certain type of style. You know what I'm saying? It's a long period of a certain type of look, and then ultimately it just morphs dramatically for at the very least a few chapters. A lot of people were left confused, and a lot of people were giving a little bit of backlash to a certain degree at that point anyway to Ikemoto because they were like, yo, why does this character look so different? Obviously, after the fact, it was a little bit of a workaround where Ikemoto eventually figured out how to do a happy medium between his own art style and kind of giving you still some of the actual look of, you know, Kishimoto's characters and Kishimoto's verse that he, you know, developed up until that point. But even more so, it's very interesting to know, and I want to say if you actually seen the interview, then you would know that it was kind of like a permission type of deal where the editor said, like, I'm not sure if I should be saying this or whatnot. But Kishimoto was a fan of Ikemoto's art. Kishimoto actually rocked with his stuff and picked him because he appreciated what he was capable of. This wasn't some like, yeah, that was his boy, yeah, he rocked with him and all that stuff, but he actually really liked his art. And if you look at some of Ikemoto's stuff outside of the realm of the Boruto story, Ikemoto can cook, Ikemoto can draw. People's perception of him was just that, hey, it doesn't match what we're so used to. That was the real gripes of people's problem with Ikemoto, on top of the fact that even with every chapter, he still has to try his best to not go too far outside of the realms of the style that Kishimoto set forth. So Ikemoto has a lot on his plate to make sure he stays within the realms of what the fans want and expect, but at the same time still delivering his own flavor. And if Kishimoto was a fan before that of Ikemoto, like, props to Ikemoto. He didn't just get this, like, this isn't a nepotism type of deal by any means. This is something that he deserved. He earned it. Question 3. Were there any specific requests from Kishimoto to Ikemoto when the series began? Kishimoto reiterated a lot that Boruto was Ikemoto's work and he wanted him to approach it with his own sensibilities and style. And that's something that we kind of already know. It was pretty much established. Kishimoto emphasized that. It's been emphasized in interviews like, yo, this is Ikemoto's story. I feel like it's a double entendre in that way, and one aspect is like, yo dog, this is like, you know, his thing, you better respect my guy, but then at the same time it also kind of gets Kishimoto removed from it, so when he ever does do his next work, is like, people aren't going to be exhausted from like, but haven't you been doing Boruto this whole time? Like, no, like, that's Ikemoto's work, here's my new stuff. So like, while he was doing Samurai 8, for example, and Boruto was simultaneously coming out, it was like he was trying to make sure that he lets people know, this is not me that's writing this thing, so you guys can, you know, rest assured that whenever I do have my work, it's going to be something else. Again, like, double meanings in my opinion of like, Kishimoto's like, respect my guy, but also, yeah, I'm not writing that thing, so just letting y'all know. Were there any difficulties or challenges you faced when starting up Boruto? To be honest, I don't think we even had the luxury of worrying about how difficult it might be. We just decided to go for it and start running with the idea. From there, we held meetings to figure out what kind of story we wanted to develop. So essentially, they didn't have creative luxury in those days. They didn't have the like, hey, you know, there was a lot of pressure at that particular point. They were basically thrusted into the situation of, oh crap, like, you know, think, for example, I know this is out the box or left field maybe, but Batman Beyond. If you've ever heard anything about Batman Beyond, when it was the spin-off of a highly coveted and classic IP of, you know, Batman, and it was like, okay, write a younger, more hip version of Batman, was basically what the Boruto story and concept and idea, at the very least initially, and even now, because Boruto, you know, he got the sauce, he got the swag, all of that stuff. That's basically what they were thrusted into, and they didn't have the luxury of like, yo, is it gonna work, is it not gonna work? It was basically, make it work by any means necessary. Question 5. Was Naruto always going to have a child? How did the character Boruto come to be? Very interesting question. This is something that gives insight into, well, did Kishimoto always have that idea in his mind that Naruto is going to have a family, he's gonna get married and have kids? The idea that the character would be married and have children had already been decided to some extent, and just narrative wise, it just always made sense. Just looking at it from that perspective, it just always was was like, yo dog, this is a story of a guy that was so lonely. If you look at Naruto, and they reminded us a trillion times of like, homie was lonely, you know, even going to the movies, Road to Ninja and stuff like that. Well, technically you could say it's not canon or whatever, but the stuff with Iruka, where, you know, the birthday and all that stuff, it's a reminder that this guy was so alone that he deserves the happy ending. He deserves the wife of his dreams. He deserves the family that he always wanted and didn't have when he was coming up. And yeah, like maybe right now in the Boruto story or whatnot, Naruto and his wife is technically asleep, so to speak, but when he awakens and all is said and done, he's going to go back to having a happy and good life that he deserves, and probably better than ever. What were your first impressions when you saw Boruto? What really struck me was how much he resembled both Hinata and Naruto. When I first saw his design, I just thought, wow, this is amazing. Yeah, when most of us saw it, a lot of us was just like, yo, it's awesome to see again Naruto having something extra. Like, you know what I'm saying? Once you have kids, that's your kid for life regardless, you know what I mean? So on top of the fact that a lot of us probably thought like, oh snap, so Naruto's, you know, story, whether it be with this kid or whatever, the future is bright for this story continuing onward. I think a lot of us felt that way at the very least. How did Kawaki come to be? This is a very interesting question. Remember, Kawaki is one of the new additions to this verse. He was not a Naruto character. He's not technically tied to anybody in the Naruto, you know, OG series. He was a fresh, brand new idea and concept for the Boruto story. Him being a character who essentially starts with nothing, yet exists as someone who has been given so much to fill that emptiness. I believe that was something we had discussed from the very beginning. If you think about it, Kawaki was referenced as the vessel. Like, that was what he was called, essentially, the vessel. So it was almost very poetic of who Kawaki was and his whole relation to this whole scenario. Let's not forget the fact that now it's a little bit rocky and a little bit murky out here and whatnot, but Kawaki's relationship prior to these times was that, you know, Naruto was like a surrogate father to him. He loved him, he admired him, he couldn't believe that, like, yo dog, out of everybody in the world, I'm the one that you chose to essentially be like your son, and you know, you allowing me to be a part of your family and all this stuff. Like, it was a very, very important aspect to a character that again was referenced as a vessel. How did you feel when you became the new editor in charge? Again, there's two editors that have been answering these questions. This is the current editor of Boruto that is answering this one. I was just really happy about it. I've been reading Naruto since I was in elementary school and kept reading it through high school, so I was really happy to be involved in the sequel, and I love to hear that. It's always a good thing to hear, especially like, you know, an editor that has a very big role. The fact that he's been a long time fan of this story and he's now a part of the thing. You want people ideally that are helping to create whatever works you're, you know, working on, that are passionate about it, that love it, because when there's love, all you can do at that particular point is hope that they give it their all, because love is one of the most powerful things in the world. I know a lot of people like to say it's cringy, you know, the power of love and whatnot. That's just the truth. Love can move mountains. Love can make people do things you would never in a trillion years expect them to do. So if somebody loves this work, they're a fan of it for a long time, they're going to give it their best foot forward regardless. And I'm not sure when this editor came to be within the Boruto story. Probably more recent, you got to imagine. But ultimately, it seems as though it's showcasing that he has made sure to make the characters all have immense glow-ups, look epic, awesome, incredible moments. Like, yeah, if he came within the Two Blue Vortex, you know, timeline, so to speak, which is probably the case, he has demonstrated his love and passion along with Ikamoto in them. How do you work on the series now? I usually just meet with Ikamoto and we figure things out together. To put it simply, we talk about the next chapter, what direction the chapter should take, and which character will be spotlighted. Ikamoto will share his ideas and I'll either agree or offer some suggestions. That's basically how our meetings go. Based on those meetings, Ikamoto creates the storyboards. I review them first, and if there are no issues, we have Kishimoto supervise them. From there, Kishimoto will offer praise or some feedback, and with that, the manuscript is created, and essentially, yeah, that's for the most part what we've been told, but this next one is going to give a little bit more of why I started the video the way I did. Check this out. Do Kishimoto and Ikamoto ever speak directly with each other? Like, you know, actual communication. Not very often. I remember a French interview where they said they discussed whether a certain character should live or die. In cases like that, the two of them speak directly over the phone. And when you hear this, you know, it just adds to this whole scenario of, so a long time ago we were told Ukyo Kodachi was handing the reins over to Masashi Kishimoto. He was going to be working on this thing. Later on we find out that he's not the one writing it, that he just supervises and he gives input on each chapter. Now we find out that the communication with these people is so scarce that they don't even really speak like that the way you would ideally expect. You would expect, like, you know, every single week they're rubbing elbows in the studio together, right? And the fact that they reference like the conversation of whether Code should live or die or something like that. Obviously Code lived. That was a long time ago of that conversation. So you got to imagine, and I heard somewhere, I could totally be making this up or not, but I heard somewhere that they had like maybe a phone call or two and maybe like a Zoom meeting or something like that. Like, and again, I could be totally making that up or not, or, you know, whatever. But if that's the case, that makes you really question, like, wow, so why was we told, other than for marketing purposes, that Kishimoto was really at the helm of this thing? Why were we told later on that, like, you know, he's integral, he's still really supervising, where basically they speak via like third parties damn near for the most part? Like, they don't actually really talk like that. Like, it sounds like talking on the phone is a privilege between Kishimoto and Ikamoto, you know, the crew and whatnot. It's kind of like, what the heck? Communication for something as important as one of the most highest selling, highest grossing, in general one of the biggest IP in the world, you know, Boruto being attached to Naruto, should be a lot more close than what we're being told right here. Like, imagine you're creating a story, or imagine you're working on something and it's like, yo, the person that is supposed to be overseeing this whole thing, like, nah, they don't really speak, homie, you know, they speak via messenger birds, or they speak via telepathy. That's how they get the work done. Like, huh? Kishimoto got motherfuckers speaking in Morse code cryptography in order to get this stuff done. This is madness. What's going on here? And again, it does add to the whole validity of, yeah, it is Ikamoto's manga, bar none. Like, come on. If Kishimoto isn't even really wanting to get on the phone and stuff like that, like, what are we doing here? So props to Ikamoto really driving this ship. Question 11, do you know which characters are popular overseas? From what I can tell, Boruto, Sarada, and Himawari seem to be especially popular. Boruto and Himawari as Naruto's kids, and Sarada as Sasuke's daughter. Be it the Sharingan or the Rasengan, I think part of it is that they carry on these iconic Naruto elements, which for the Boruto purists, for the people that are only Boruto fans, they constantly slander Naruto and all that stuff. This is not the greatest look for, you know, the popularity wise aspect, because if it was that they were like, yo, it's Kawaki, bar none, Kawaki is the, you know, most popular, then it would be like, okay, because Kawaki is an original character for the Boruto story. Kawaki has no blood relations, quote unquote, so to speak, to, you know, the previous cast. Like, he was created for the Boruto story. He's an original character. This is, you know, a Boruto character that rolls up the ranks. But the fact that pretty much the kids of the previous generation are the ones that are the most popular, excluding, of course, that they're not going to mention, like, you know, Naruto characters, like, not going to be like, well, Naruto and Sasuke, because that's an obvious one. It kind of lends to the whole idea that, yeah, Naruto's influence and Naruto's impact is still one of the driving forces that brings fans to this thing. Of course, Boruto has separated itself from the idea and the concept of, like, oh, it's just riding off the coattails of Naruto. They've literally pretty much removed the characters at this particular point damn near from the story that drove that narrative with Naruto and Sasuke. Boruto's been doing his thing. However, the fact that, again, Naruto's kids are the most popular, the fact that, again, Sasuke's kid is the most popular, that just shows that, you know, at some given point, Naruto and it's gonna take the reins back. I'm just saying. And before Boruto fans throw a fit because I'm just spitting facts. And last question, were there chapters that left you amazed after receiving the manuscripts? Back during the original Naruto series, there's a scene between Naruto and Sasuke. I think it was chapter 698. They're both lying on the ground and Sasuke says, "Shut up, you buffoon." It being set in the final valley with their hands sort of overlapping was already decided, and so I took part in discussion about what the final line there should be. That scene really meant a lot to me. And then later in the first chapter of Boruto, I think it was the opening color pages when Kawaki and Boruto are facing each other, I remember thinking, it's really beginning. It left a strong impression on me. Chapter 10 in volume 3, there's an action panel with Sarada. The moment where Sarada uses Chidori is just so cool. And in the same chapter, Himawari awakens. That becomes the big cliffhanger at the end of the chapter. It felt like a perfectly constructed chapter. I remember getting really excited about it. I will say, well, Naruto chapter 698, come on, of course. That's an iconic moment, not only within Naruto and Boruto, but within anime and manga history. That's one of the most important ones. So definitely, of course, like, there's a million we could pick from Naruto. The ones that he picked out from from Boruto. Well, the Kawaki and Boruto future fight thingy, that was pretty much what hooked most people into the story. That's what kept people going, even at times where people doubted in many aspects of the way of the journey of the Boruto story. Like, people doubted, like, oh, the art style is different. Oh, when are we gonna get to the time skip? Like, there was so many things, and that was the thing that hooked people. So yeah, that was definitely impactful, and I like that they chose a more recent moment that was actually a really epic moment with Himawari and, you know, the whole Nine Tails situation, because that was an awesome moment, and it demonstrates that while they give epic moments to Boruto, they don't only focus on like Boruto and Kawaki. They give you epic moments with Sarada. They give you epic moments with Himawari. They don't just shy away from things. And I'll give credit to Boruto, where a lot of people feel like after part 1 of Naruto, you know, it was for the most part the Naruto and Sasuke show, and when you see other characters doing stuff, it's like, ah, cool, get back to Naruto and Sasuke. With this one, when Boruto has an epic moment, it's great, but also when Sarada has an epic moment, it's great, but also when Himawari has an epic moment, it's great. When Mitsuki does something epic, it's great. Like, there's many aspects in there that are awesome and epic and deserve praise outside of, you know, just like the 2 MCs. So props to Boruto on that. But let me know what you guys think about this whole situation. How do you feel finding out more about Kishimoto's involvement or lack thereof in this whole scenario of the creation of the Boruto story? How do you feel about the characters that are deemed the most popular being pretty much the kids of the previous gen, and your overall expectations for the Boruto story moving forward? That's all I have for this one. I'm Tim. As always, people, have an awesome day. Peace in.